Hey, Delaney, do you remember that time that we recorded this great episode and the whole time we had technical difficulties and so it sounded like I was sitting in a tunnel?
Yes, that's the same one that suddenly my voice would just be distorted and I couldn't make it any better in editing.
Well, audience, what we decided to do is to just go ahead, release it to you, let you hear it, and hope that you would forgive us for these technical difficulties. So we're going to give this episode to you, and we promise by next time we will have figured out what the problem is and fixed it.
Thank you for understanding, and we will try to make sure that next week sounds better. Thanks for listening.
I'm Heather Fleming, founder of In Purpose Educational Services and author of the book My Black Friend Says.
And I'm Delaney Ray, the coordinator of the LEAP Institute. So what do we do now, Heather?
Same thing we've always done, Delaney. Keep fighting for an equitable world.
This time in a podcast.
Welcome to the Listen, Learn, Love podcast, where comfortable friends chat about uncomfortable topics.
Let's do it.
So, Delaney.
Yes, Heather.
You know, one of the things that I was thinking about is that, every 4 years, we really, and I know people don't like talking about politics, etc. And even on this podcast, we're not going to talk about politics because, we're a nonprofit organization that is built around equity. But the reality is that, unfortunately, equity is impacted by our politics at times. And so, well, a lot. But one of the things I was thinking about yesterday as I watched some of the inauguration, most of the inauguration activities and events, is that every 4 years, we really, if we're going to look at it from a positive perspective, we really get an opportunity to have a national conversation about what we want to be as a country. And so all of these people have the opportunity to present what their vision of our country is, and then people have the opportunity to talk about that and really, address it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of like starting over, getting to refresh things, or that spring cleaning feeling of, what's our new goals? What direction are we going in? How, everybody has a passion and a mission. And I think this is the time when we get to really think about that and how we're going to work with the new platform, the new administration for our own goals and missions that are important to us.
It is. One of the things that when I do equity training, I don't tell people how to vote. That's not my job. But I tell them to look at the individuals whose platforms match most closely with their goals and their vision and their values, and to learn how to work, because no one's going to be perfect. And so
yes.
How to learn how to work with that person or that individual. But, go ahead and vote for, even if it's not the person that you would have preferred, go ahead and vote for which one matches us closely. And so even as we think about this equity fight, voting and how we use our vote, how we use our civic power is part of creating that equity. And so I'm excited to engage in, and keep engaging in conversations about contributing to the U.S. that I want to see us be. That's why I thought Amanda Gorman's poem was so very powerful, because her poem addressed both the hope that is America, but also the legacy of inequity that we have to also reckon with. But she just did it so beautifully that it really gave me hope, and it really got me thinking about, what are we looking forward to? So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. Right now, what is it that you have hope for with the next 4 years and what we may be able to do? What do you have hope for?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the biggest missions on my heart is always human rights, but especially the rights for the LGBTQ community. And last night there was a new executive order put in, and the president of the Human Rights Campaign, Alfonso David, has called that last night's executive order, the most substantive, oh my gosh, this is probably the hardest word since I had to say fetishization. Okay. Is the most substantive, wide-ranging executive order concerning sexual orientation and gender identity ever issued. That's huge.
It's huge.
To wake up in the morning and realize that the rights of your loved ones are going to be protected and looked out for and considered equal to those of others when the only difference is who they love.
I think that's big.
That's what I'm looking forward to. I think that is a huge part of my life, is fighting for equity within the LGBTQ community. So yeah, thanks for asking. What are you feeling very excited for, and what are you looking forward with hope?
Because of the work that we do, I was most excited. Yesterday's inauguration speech was the first inauguration speech to directly and openly address white supremacy.
Wow, yes.
And so from my understanding, I will say that I haven't researched that fully. I think, though, that some people, some of these speeches, may have mentioned it indirectly, but yesterday's speech was the first one that just went right to it. And so that is what I'm looking for is, with everything that's been going on in our country in the last few years, the systemic racial inequities have really been put on display. We can see it now. It's substantive.
I feel like that was just a dig at my... I feel very called out right now.
Don't feel like that, Pokey. No, it is. It's being, and so that's the thing about it, is that we've got to, when it comes to racial discrimination, we've got to name it. And kind of what we're seeing right now is the culmination of all these years of us trying to sweep it under the rug, to only kind of deal with it, to only mention it in whispers. That's the reason
it's been kind of
glad, that we're able to talk about this on a regular basis between the two of us, and then with the audience, hopefully if they start emailing us their questions and etc. But just to be able to engage in these conversations, we don't know what we don't know until we talk about it.
Yes.
And so I'm really excited. One of the other executive orders that was signed was to reverse the previous administration's order that all equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion training in the federal government and with contractors for the federal government be suspended, basically saying that there should be no training over equity, inclusion, multiculturalism, etc. And if we look at our Secretary of State actually released a statement yesterday calling multiculturalism and divisive. And so I was excited to see that diversity, equity, and inclusion training is going to be restored, because with the work that we do with In Purpose Educational Services, for those of you who don't know, our nonprofit In Purpose Educational Services, the biggest thing that we discover is that sometimes the issue is that people just don't know. And how can they know if they're never taught?
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you that, because you are a professional in diversity training. So through In Purpose Educational Services, tell us a little bit. I mean, I know, but for people listening, it would be great to hear your voice and your words. When you created this nonprofit. I'm just going to go ahead and say that I know you did not create it with the purpose of being divisive. So have you
No, not at all.
your training to be divisive? Have you found the people who take your training classes to come out more divided? Tell us a little bit about In-Purpose Educational Services and what you see, because this is your profession.
It is, and I chose it. And I chose it because it gave me so much satisfaction. It's hard work. It's draining work, but it just provides me with so much joy and love, etc. So basically, I was a teacher, and I was teaching in a large school district here in St. Louis. And I started noticing that with some of the training that we were doing, it made an assumption that everyone was at the same point, the same beginning point.
Mm-hmm.
And that a lot of times that beginning point was a little bit further ahead than where people actually were. And so the result of that ended up being that because these people, felt overwhelmed, felt attacked, felt shame, felt all these different things, it ended badly. And it usually ended badly for the BIPOC like me.
Okay.
So after there was an incident during one training where one of our other teachers, I was telling a story and he felt very defensive and just began, arguing and kind of going into attack mode, that fight or flight type thing. He decided to fight. And it ended up with me and all of people of color within the room in tears.
Oh,
And
man.
it's so damaging. And so after that happened, we were already doing lots of social justice work. I was in charge of a teacher cohort, social justice cohort. And some of the stuff that I learned in there, I actually took it and I created a salary credit course for other teachers to take, where they could come in and, learn a little bit more about how to have these discussions, how to do these works, because that's what I felt like was missing. They jumped in with the hard stuff almost from the beginning without teaching people some coping mechanisms, some discussion, like ways to get into the discussion, ways to process information. And so I created the course for that purpose. And it ended up being, really working, to the point that people were like, here, create a second part. So I had 2 parts to it. It was 12 credit hours, 12 clock hours for them. It ended up lasting over a semester. And it was just really, satisfying work. And I got to meet all these great teachers and start working with people that really wanted to jump in and do this work. Well, when I went through kind of a professional crisis, I guess you would call it, as far as what I wanted to really be doing, the question that came to me was, if you could be doing anything, what would it be? And it was this work. And so that's how I began In-Purpose Educational Services. And then from there, I began doing training. I began doing, a few speeches. I began doing the Come to the Table event. And the biggest thing that I found is how much, if we're doing this work right, if we teach people the skills that they need to process the information first, we can, number one, put the learning curve on a much steeper level. Because we've taught them how to process shame and actually to reject that shame.
Right.
We've taught them how to process some of those negative emotions that might impact their ability to connect with other people. And because we've taught that, now we can have the real conversations that we need to be having. And then the biggest thing that I taught people is, you're going to mess up. You're going to mess up. As long as you are committed to this, you're in this work, you're going to mess up. And so I also taught them how to fix their mistakes when they did, so that they can move forward, without fear.
Right.
To be able to reconcile and to be able to keep the connection. And so what I actually found, and when it comes to training, is that done right, it actually brings people together. I have so many good people that I know. I've been able to create a network of people that if, one of my friends needs help, I know someone from somewhere else that can partner with them in order to get the work of equity done. And that has been what's most rewarding, is also, the friendships that get created.
And that doesn't sound divisive at all, and I've experienced this with you. I've seen this happen. So with this idea of starting, at the bottom, what would you say to somebody who's listening right now and says, yeah, you know what, I'm kind of interested. I'm not sure I truly believe in some of the things I hear, like white privilege. I'm not sure I truly understand or believe that systemic racism is as bad as what some people say. Are they welcome at the table?
Yes. I think that here's the big thing. If you're just beginning this journey, my uncle used to say, because I have 6 agreements for productive conversations about race. And so one of those 6 agreements is listen to understand and not to respond. And I get that from my great uncle, Big Ray. He's 83 years old, absolutely brilliant. I adore him. But Big Ray, he used to always say, listen twice, speak once.
Mm.
And so when you're at the beginning of this journey, the first thing you're wanting to do is to just listen, reflect, think about it. We have the work that I'm trying to do that we're trying to do, because you're in this with me 100%. The work that we're trying to do is, to offer people opportunities for learning, for networking, and for connection as often as possible. And so, one thing, if people are just beginning and trying to figure out, like, what do I want to do? What is my role, etc. We have like training we're doing for the next few months. If there are people that are really interested in, doing this work and learning, I would encourage them to visit our website at www.inpurposeea.com. That's inpurposeea.com. Because on there, we have a lot of, if they go to the events page, they'll see we have a lot of opportunities for them to listen and for them to learn and for them to connect with people. Like, we have our speaker series coming up where we're going to have 4 speakers that are doing the work in different realms. And so Dr. Jason Heiserer, he's doing the work in education. Reverend Renita Green, she's doing the work in her religious community as a faith leader. Brittany Farrell, she's doing the work in healthcare. And then the incredible, incomparable Amy Hunter, she's doing the work just in the community. She's a huge leader in the community, both for her job and then for the stuff that she does just within the, volunteer work within the community. And so we have that series coming up, and it would just be good for people to sit back and listen, because honestly, when they look at me and they're like, oh, so much, my work, everything that I know has been based upon what I'm telling people to do right now. I got to this level of expertise by my experiences, by listening, by learning, and by connecting. And that is what has enabled me to do the work. We're also going to have like an anti-racism series for each level. And so we have one for adults coming up. We have one for children for 9 to 14 years old. And then we have one for parents and children of kids like 4 to 8. And so we're here. We're doing this work. We want people to be able to join us in whatever way they can and figure out their role, because an audience, I'm speaking directly to you right now. One of the things that I realized, that Delaney has realized, I think I can speak for her on this one, is that there's always somebody waiting out there for you. Like, yes, the work that we're doing, it's because, and we're able to do it because there were people out there waiting for the skills that Delaney and I bring, the compassion, the empathy, the ability to, explain things well, the ability to reach out to others and make connection. There are people that were waiting for that. And so right now, whatever skill you're sitting on, there is someone waiting for you to use that skill to help make life better for everyone. So you do the work by just starting. And that's the hope right now that I have, is that there are so many people, like, I celebrated yesterday, but I woke up this morning knowing I still had work to do. And so it's figuring out what that work is going to be.
Yes.
So Delaney,
Yes.
what would you say is the most important thing we should all be thinking about right now? I put you on the spot.
I would say the most important thing goes back to what you said, which is kind of finding your place. What is your passion? What changes do you want to see? Where do you want to put forth your voice and talents? And I would challenge people to try to find those action steps. This is the time. Every 4 years, every 8 years, we kind of get this new opportunity to create the United States that is for all. How do you want this to look, and how are you going to go out and make a difference?
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And I think, keep having these conversations. Like, I think about the whole reason why this podcast started. We've explained this in other episodes, but the whole reason why this podcast started was because we were having such good conversations about various issues, and it was going on all the time. And so one of the things that I'm learning from you, and I have so many questions about, and you're so gracious about answering, is your experience, being in an interracial family, where, some people look one way, other people look the other. I did want to, because at the end of last episode, you mentioned my comment, and so I wanted to explain that. So Delaney and I are sitting and talking about different episodes that we want to do, and I mentioned that I want Katie on for a specific episode because it would be nice with her as being a white woman, to have her experience and her knowledge and feedback be part of that topic. And Delaney says,
and I said, am I not white enough for you?
And because of previous conversations we've had, I said, no, Delaney, and you're also not brown enough for me either. You're more of a confusing beige. So now you all know the story.
And I love it so much because, as I've been telling Heather, I kind of have this ethnic ambiguity that I truly think is a confusing beige. It's a perfect example.
Well, and that's the thing about it, is that, I have a hope for the fact that we can have these conversations where we're open to talking about all of that, because you've really opened up my eyes about that, that feeling of being in the middle. And, how do we as a society create a place for everyone? And it just is another aspect to think about, that sometimes those people who feel like they're stuck in the middle, we need to create a space for them to feel safe and to feel accepted and to feel part of our, a needed and much loved part of our society. And, that ends up being a goal of mine for our equity training.
And in doing that, that is so inclusive. Nothing about that is divisive. And I think some people fear that having these conversations is what is divisive. If we talk about that and we disagree, sometimes, Heather, you and I don't exactly see eye to eye on everything. And eventually it's going to happen during one of these podcasts. And it's going to be a great thing because we don't always see eye to eye. There are certain, the term I use, there are certain mountains I'm not willing to die on. There are certain topics or arguments that you may feel really strongly about. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I see where you're coming from. And then vice versa. But by having the conversations and leaving a space for each voice and for each identity and for each person, that's not divisive. When people learn how to have these conversations from a place of love, from a place of wanting every person to be included, is not divisive. What we see happen in the comment section on Facebook or Twitter, that is divisive.
Is divisive. I do want to, I have two comments. At first, I do want to remind you that we have actually already had a disagreement on these podcasts.
We have?
Yes, if you recall, I told you that Birkenstocks are up.
Okay, you're really going to start that again?
I'm
Bring it.
saying
Let's
they
do it.
are,
Let's do it.
Delaney. We're going to go shoe shopping as soon as this COVID thing is over because no. But then also, I wanted to say yes. You know, one of the things that I've been also telling people over the last few days is to stop engaging. We don't want to keep feeding into hate. We don't want to keep feeding into anger. And so right now, there are people that we're just not going to convince that equity, that, you know, like some of the worst comments I saw were under, you know, Joe Biden's selection of a trans woman to lead one of his departments, of Pete Buttigieg being chosen for, you know, Secretary of Transportation. I don't want us to keep engaging in that because we have more things to be dedicating our energy to. I'm not saying that it doesn't need to be addressed. It does. But what I'm finding in these sections is that we're having the same argument over and over again. And so at a certain point, we have to both look at the actual needs of all Americans, including the ones that aren't fully on board with this whole idea of inclusive America, because not everyone is. So we need to both address their needs while also not giving oxygen to hate.
Well, and I heard it put a brilliant way, is that when you're just getting in an argument with somebody in the comment section on social media, you are having interaction without affection. What we're doing is very different because we are establishing affection. We are establishing relationships. We are establishing safe norms through which we can have these really hard conversations when it comes to the training and the work that we do. And it's very different. You're not just pitting people against each other who are just doing their best to throw out everything they believe in and not listening to the other person. That is divisive. But having these engagements, these interactions, when there is a basis of affection and a mutual respect and desire for doing and being and getting better, that's not divisive. That's beautiful.
It is. You know, this is the Listen, Learn, Love podcast. And one of the foundations, the very foundation of our work, is a love for people. And because we love people, we want all of these people to have the opportunity to be free, to make connections, to, you know, have the best in opportunities and in rights and, you know, in so many areas. And so the love part, I would encourage anyone that, you know, look at what's at the foundation of anything that you support. At the foundation of it isn't some kind of love. And there's lots of different types of love. But if it's not based in love for humanity, then it's probably not a good thing. And so that's one thing that doesn't make our work divisive, is that the foundation of it is a love of humanity and a love of people. Yeah.
So Heather,
yes.
That was beautiful, but I just want to know, does that include a love for people who wear Birkenstocks?
I love the people, not the Birkenstocks.
Heather, tell everyone listening, if they would like to further engage in this conversation, how can they do that?
Well, one thing that they can do, if they're subscribed to our Patreon, then they can go on there. We post questions under each episode that we post, and they can go in there and have a discussion. We also are adding people to our In Purpose Leaders Forum, which is, you know, our private group that's on Facebook for people to have these types of discussions. And then finally, if they have like a question that they want to ask or maybe have us address on the podcast, then they can email us at info@inpurposeea.com. That's inpurposeea.com.
And the best part about all of these options is that this truly is an opportunity to have interactions with affection. These groups are people who are learning to have these conversations, have learned skills to have these conversations. It's not at all what you see in the comments on Twitter.
It's not. And, you know, so that's what I want to get away from are those types of communications, because they're not doing any good. they're creating more anger, they're creating more hate, and that's what we don't want to do. But what I do want to do is to acknowledge some of our new patrons and to thank them so much.
We have new patrons?
We do. So I would like to thank Frankie Ruprecht. I would like to thank Miriam Krajewski. And then I would like to also thank Sarah Wallace Hancock, as well as Emily Decker. We really appreciate all of your support. Go through this endeavor. Your pledge for our Patreon helps to support both this podcast and also the work that we're doing with In Purpose, because people don't know this, but In Purpose, we don't get loans. We don't have a grant. We're looking into some of those things, but right now we solely run on the donations and generosity of our supporters, the people that take those courses and the people that donate to our podcast and donate to In Purpose Educational Services. So we just want to thank each and every one of you for your support.
And I'm pretty sure I heard in there that Heather said once we reach 100 Patreon supporters that she is going to wear a pair of Birkenstocks and allow me to take pictures and post those publicly. I heard that.
I could cuss right now.
I love you, Heather. Can we do this again next week?
We sure can, Delaney. I love you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode. You can support us on Patreon by looking for the Listen, Learn, Love podcast, or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at InPurposeES. That is INPurposeES. You can also follow us on Twitter at InPurposeEA, or visit our website at www.inpurposeea.com.
Heather, this was great. Do you want to do it again next week?
I sure do, Delaney.
Awesome. Talk to you then.
Bye.